Greetings, friends. So some months back I watched this talk by Tom Rosol, who is known by his YouTube channel Survive the Jive, which celebrates European paganism, Germanic paganism, the ancient traditions that some Europeans can look back to. And he was giving or participating in a Q&A session at an event called Pagan Futures 1 year ago. So this is not a timely video, but I put things away, but I was meaning to respond to this. So I watched it again after having, put it away for a while, and this time I made some notes, and now I'm going to go through it again, maybe refer to my notes, but I just want to give my reaction. Now, he talks for 40 minutes. He's basically outlining what is paganism up against. He tries to do that first, which is a bit tedious, and then he gets into the question of how does he define paganism or Germanic paganism at 20 minutes into his talk. So I was kind of thinking of just starting at the 20-minute mark, but there are some other things he says earlier on that I felt are relevant. I agree with much of what he has to say, actually. So I do sympathize with some of the motivations that draw people towards what they perceive to be the traditional ways of their ancestors, ceremony and aspects of actually participating that we are longing for. And I can sympathize, and they recognize a lot of what's wrong with the modern world. So there's a lot we can agree on. Obviously, I don't agree with paganism because I'm an Orthodox Christian, but let's have a look at what he has to say. And I'll probably skip over a lot of what he says because not everything is totally relevant to comment on, but I may take liberties to edit and skip ahead.
Thank you very much, Dan, for that wonderful performance. That was brilliant. Professor Ronald Hutton disagrees with the data from the last census, and he claims there are about 250,000 pagans in the UK. The next census data is released in 3 days' time, and it's expected things will get a larger number.
So I'm going to skip this part. He's just talking about how paganism, as he defines it, has been growing in Britain. He's quite honest that there's basically no ancient paganism still being practiced. Like there's no temples, there's no public animal sacrifices or...
But I have personally witnessed in the more than 10 years of pagan practice in this country that there's been a big growth in my kind of paganism, Germanic paganism particularly. When I became a pagan in 2009, I'd attend like mixed pagan events, and there were no Germanic pagans present at those. And now it does seem like Germanic Norse paganism is quite common.
He said there's been a big growth in my kind of paganism, Germanic paganism. So do we get to choose what kind of pagan we get to be? If the religion is based on what you want, how are you serving a higher order? Now, okay, maybe that's not fair. Maybe I shouldn't have quite put it that way. But you see what I mean? Like, the religion has to call you, and you don't call religion. The ancient pagans, they didn't get to shop around either because they had to serve the gods of their city or their town.
The decline of the sacred in the Western mind has resulted in the gradual decline of the church and a desacralization of the world itself. Various forms of paganism are among the religions and ideologies that are filling the vacuum created by the death of the Christian God. Not all of those are good.
He's right that there has been a decline in the sacred in the Western mind. We might call this the disenchantment of the world. The world has become a cold place and sterile. And I like that he acknowledges that Christianity had a role in keeping things sacred, keeping an experience of the sacred in our life. the way we understood our lives, but also to some degree in the physical world. You take one religion away, another religion fills the void. We are in agreement, this always happens. We are in agreement that there really is no non-religious way to live your life. You're always religious, but I'll grant that there's more like informal ways, like, oh yeah, I don't think I'm religious. I don't go to any rituals or meetups, or I don't live by any book. But no, I mean, you have moral principles, mostly which have been inherited from some religion that you operate by. And the ritual element, the higher symbolic world, is unavoidable in the way we go about our lives by interacting with other humans. The rainbow flag is a religion. It's the religion of the global American empire. You don't get a neutral state where there's just amoral or disinterested actors and disinterested institutions and disinterested people. People have principles which are spiritual, which color how they see the world.
As my colleague, Dr. Villayonga, explained, the radical transcendence of the Puritans gave way to rationalism and the Enlightenment, having failed to merge with the transcendental immanence found in the art and magi of the Renaissance. No wonder, then, that the doctrine of materialism, which killed the church, has become the new church, with a similar doctrine of transcendence expressed in various ways through the technophilic utopian ideologies of the posthuman, the singularity, and transhumanism.
I wouldn't say that the doctrine of materialism killed the church. I would say that heresy killed the church. The turning away from God in our hearts is the ground from which the further declines move into the cold, sterile world of materialism proceeds. First, we turn away from God in our hearts, then we become blind to his presence in the world.
So when I say transhumanist, I'm not just talking about what the literal textbook definition of transhumanist is. I'm talking about anyone who has uncritically assimilated themselves to the objectives of an undifferentiated global humanity, united in the goal of reducing physical suffering and pain through the development of novel technologies, whether medical, genetic, artificial, or whatever. And they're all to some extent a devotee of this cult. And this is the dominant religion of the West at this time.
So then he goes on to talk about the coming globalized religion, how it's going to blend different aspects of the current religions. But he's trying to say that European paganism is in opposition to the beliefs of the transhumanists. So I'm skipping ahead to around the 16-minute mark.
These people reject nature, the world of nature, and that's why I compare them to Gnostics. They reject our pagan view that nature and matter are divine and not something to escape from. Left-wing thought is ultimately about rebelling, and nature is the ultimate authority to rebel against.
So this is a key point that I won't get into too much here, because he's going to talk more about it later when he really gets into trying to explain his form of paganism. But it's one of the main differences between Christianity and this form of paganism, this idea that nature can be divine, or that Mother Nature is something to worship. Essentially, he's confusing creation with the Creator. Did the earth create itself? A materialist would say that the earth was created by physical forces which brought together dust which coalesced into the planet. A Christian would say that God created the earth. So in both cases, there was still some creation, something acting, even though one is just abstract forces, but even the abstract forces is moving in the direction of, okay, something operating that we might call it, they don't want to call it a creator, but you see, it's moving in that direction. It's not like, oh, it just created itself, right? But okay, I mean, if nature is divine, then are you saying that nature is the creator? Nature created itself? Maybe they do believe that. They may. I mean, a popular pagan belief is that everything is cycle, so there's no there's no real past or future because everything's this eternal cycle. You're going around. And if nature is divine, then that's pantheism, as I understand it. Like God is all, God is everything, God is you and me, God is the trees, the skies, God is our thoughts and everything. It's all God. It's pan, like all, like through the world. And that's just another very popular New Age collapse of categories.
They're coming to the conclusion to rebel against the laws of nature, the ultimate authority on earth, which they perceive as unfair. I don't want to be what biology has determined.
Well, biology didn't actually make you, in a true sense. We don't mean biology is the true ground from which you arise. It might be through biology, perhaps, and through other mediums of spirit, which you exist as a human. I'm not trying to sound all like Eastern mysticism. I'm just saying there's obviously more components to the human than the physical body. There's a mind and a soul, and there's something more. There's the metaphysical element. So he goes on talking about transhumanism. He makes a good observation that atheistic liberalism has for centuries borrowed the Augustinian doctrine of free will, and now it is shifting to an illiberal deterministic philosophy with no measure of right or wrong except pain and pleasure. And I almost fully agree with that statement, but he said atheistic liberalism. But liberalism was kind of always atheistic. It didn't think it was at the time, but that's exactly where it was moving. The point which I agree with is that it was all this great world. It was the 90s, basically. It's just the 90s were great, right? The 90s were great. None of this woke stuff, but we could still all just do our thing. But that gives rise to a very unpleasant world where you're not just at your liberty to do or say what you want anymore. So let me skip ahead here to just over 20 minutes.
So what is our pagan view? When it comes to nature, matter, and death, it's almost the complete opposite of the neo-Gnostic materialist one. I'm going to refer both to historically attested European pagan religion as well as to the Neoplatonic views of Iamblichus, a Syrian who in the 3rd and 4th century formed a philosophical argument in defense of traditional pagan rituals, what he called theurgy.
There is some access to these traditions, but so much of it has been lost, and essentially they're grasping, and that's why they have to basically build on their own and use what sources they can. I'm not trying to disparage these sources. I'm not trying to say that no, there were real traditions going on, but there are huge obstacles in the way of what the modern pagan project is trying to do, because the oral traditions have been lost. A lot of these pagans were oral traditions. There wasn't any institution like in other religions that could pass on teachings and make more or less guarantee fail-safe mechanisms to pass on ideas and spiritual principles and ways of living. Like, I know you can say, oh, like the Bible gets mistranslated and stuff like that. You know, putting that discussion aside, we can see that, you know, other religions, Islam, to some extent Buddhism, to some extent Hinduism, even though Hinduism is, some say, the conclusion of paganism, but there are more organized forms.
While Slavic, Greek, Germanic, etc., pagans all have different names for the gods, and they revere the gods with different rites and understand them with different myths, they are all clearly related, coming ultimately from a common Indo-European source, and they share basic tenets. And for this reason, it is right that we articulate our beliefs as one, and we unite to ensure they are respected by others.
So you all worship the same gods, so you should unite as one. I mean, maybe, but didn't the ancient pagans, maybe they worshipped some similar gods, but I'm sure they would go to war against each other sometimes. The ancient Celts, they had pagan gods, and so did the ancient Romans. They had pagan gods. The two sides would be fighting each other. Maybe they shared some gods, or that were more or less the same. That didn't unite them.
I'll begin with nature and matter. First and foremost, the gods are real. They are immaterial divine personalities and must be placated for ritual offerings and festivals. These festivals and rites are placed in accordance with the apparent expression of divinity within the cycles of nature.
We would say as Orthodox Christians that there are gods, there are small g gods, and those are spirits. And in some sense, humans can, through theosis, become small g gods, but there's angels but demons. These spirits in nature, we would say, are demons. In the odd case, an angel, I suppose, like there can be holy places in nature, but we agree that yes, there are gods out there, but we don't want to follow them now, knowing what we know now through revelation. But I have to include some nuance, because I'm not going to be some variety of Protestant who's going to take this very simplistic view at the ancient past and say, they're all demon worshippers. They're all just idolaters. And yes, there was obviously idolatry going on in the pagan world, meaning physical objects were assumed to have beings in them. But I'm not going to say that the pagan world was totally apart from the Logos, the ordering principle of the universe, and Christ himself, the person of Christ, Logos. There were the seeds of truth within the pagan world, but they didn't have revelation, and they needed to be brought into the fullness of that revelation. What I'm getting at is that there is a universe of gods. This is the world of the saints and the angels and the demons. Now that gets Christianized from the pagan world, but there's also an important change that we no longer seek things in nature and try to communicate with nature spirits. There's a break in that sense, but also there do remain spirits that may protect places, that may be your protector, your guardian angel. There's Saint Michael. There's various angels that could intervene on your behalf, and all the world of the saints that you can pray to. Now, this is different. This is not about getting a transaction. That's not exactly how it works, because Christianity is not about getting something in return, unlike all the other religions, and including paganism, which was generally about getting something good for your people or for yourself, success in battle or wealth or fertility for your land or fertility for your family or any of these worldly things. And my main conclusion at the end of this is that he's caught up in the world. There's nothing transcendent in this pagan worldview. Even their conception of reincarnation just involves coming back to this world. So again, that's not entirely fair. They do believe in other worlds and they do believe in spiritual Platonic things, but again, it just gets caught up in the world. And that's why nature has to be divine for them. They can't, like Christians, conceive or have faith in a reality beyond this world, or perhaps including this world, but greater than this world. That's what heaven actually will be. It will include the earth. As far as I can be corrected if I'm wrong on that, but it's not like there's some specific place, a geographic location that is heaven. It's a spiritual reality in the hearts of men, as is hell is also a spiritual reality in your heart.
These festivals and rites are placed in accordance with the apparent expression of divinity within the cycles of nature. This is determined by the moon, the sun, and the seasons, and are held at appropriate locations deemed auspicious by virtue of the expression of the divine in local natural features. Unlike Christians or the neo-Gnostic materialists, pagans, such as the Neoplatonists, have no need of redemption from a fallen nature, because, in the words of Professor Gregory Shaw, nature itself is the body of our salvation.
Right, so they don't believe that nature is fallen. We, as Orthodox and all Christians, should believe that yes, the world is fallen, nature is fallen. We inherited mortality as a result of Adam's sin, not as personal guilt, but as just the effects of being mortal, because we have a proclivity to sin, just like Adam. The sin of Adam also introduced predator-prey relationships into the world. So it's not that nature is bad, but it is fallen. Nature has plenty of good, about it. Like, God made nature beautiful in many ways. So in some sense, we do see the spark of God in the physical world, but that is very different from viewing the world itself as divine. Because as we will also see, there is great darkness and great evil within nature. A lot of this nature worship, it leads to dark places. And the Mother Nature is so wonderful and loving and caring, and it's the maternal archetype, except it's not really. The Mother of God, that's the right female archetype. The Mother Nature is actually the Kali archetype. She's going to rip your head off. She's going to eat your children. Do not get into the habit of viewing nature as a feminine entity.
Beneath the high gods, our ancestors also venerated lower entities. The elves, the wights, the fulgir of the Germanic people, or the nymphs, lares, and daimons of the Greeks and Romans. These beings are sometimes equated with our venerable ancestors and their burial places, or sometimes with natural features like trees, springs, and stones. For the Neoplatonists, the daimons act as intermediaries between the gods and men, revealing the rhythms of the year through which we pagans connect with the gods in our rites. With their help, our rites contextualize ourselves, individually and collectively, in our proper place within the unity of the cosmos. In communion with the spirits of the lands of our forefathers, the cycles of nature, and the high gods themselves.
Yeah, as far as I'm aware, there is no room in Orthodoxy or any other forms of traditional Christianity for any approach to these creatures in good faith. There is no room for that. As far as I'm aware, and I'm willing to be corrected, none of these creatures are on the side of God. None of them are neutral. A lot of people who are not Christians, they like to say, oh, well, these beings were neutral, or they're not evil. No, every elf and nymph and gnome knows the name of Jesus Christ. They know exactly who he is. These creatures exist on the periphery of civilizations for a reason. They exist in dark and dangerous places for a reason. They lure humans to death, or they try to confuse you. They are the same as what we perceive aliens to be. They're the same beings. They've always been here. They could have remained loyal to God, but they chose to follow Satan.
Some Platonists, such as Porphyry, the student of Plotinus, like the Gnostics, came to view matter and therefore nature as the source of evil, and thus rejected traditional pagan rituals.
In Orthodox worship, we have gold and silver, we have incense and iconography. The material world is not evil, matter is not evil. Everything that God created is good. And it is merely from going against what God wants for us that evil exists. Like, evil is the privation of the good, when we turn away from what is right or good. But it really has no substance of its own. If you recognize that what the Gnostics are doing in trying to get away from matter, and then you just try to oppose the Gnostics, then I think he's just caught up in this dialectic now, where they're like, well, we gotta celebrate matter. But that's just gonna go in the opposite direction, so I view that as problematic if you're trying to just set yourself up against people who try to flee matter, but you're just gonna affirm matter. You're not rising above the dialectic.
Iamblichus opposed this, responding directly to his Phoenician teacher. He wrote, "This doctrine spells the ruin of all holy ritual and theurgic communion between gods and men, since it places the presence of superior beings outside this earth. For it amounts to saying that the divine is at a distance from the earth and cannot mingle with men, and that this lower region is a desert without gods."
I mean, that's a good point, but Christianity, of course, has the answer because Christ became incarnate and even died and suffered and lived just like any man. Not just like any man, but he lived as one of us in a fleshly body. So, in insofar as the pagans recognize that it's important for divinity not to be abstracted, just completely off out there, like Allah, which Islam is influenced from Gnosticism. So everything, oh, it's just God, it's just this, it's unimaginable. Uh, actually, maybe it's a little different with Allah, because Allah also has body parts, which it gets kind of weird. But anyways, there. Yeah, I can understand that you don't want to get caught up in this never being able to connect with the divine. That's important to have an experience and a participation here in this life in more than just a mental experience.
Theologists then were in agreement with traditional pagans across Europe that rights needed to be maintained, and that matter was not the source of evil, but a route to the divine, and indeed was contained within the divine.
So, is Survive the Jive, or the Tom Rosel, or is that his name? But is he just a pantheist? I thought if you're a pantheist, you're basically a New Ager. So please, let's not be pantheists. Pantheism is not good if you want to have clear categories, right? Because everything is just God. So if you're trying to have a clear theology and explain this is where we stand and this is why it makes sense, then pantheism is not a good direction to take if that's your goal.
So for us, there can be no retreat from matter or nature, whether spiritually transcendent retreat or into a cyber realm, a metaverse, because nature is the only path through which we can connect to the divine. We must reject, therefore, a life lived vicariously through avatars or simulated experiences in a digital realm in favor of actual physical experiences in nature.
Yeah, you're just going to get lost in your online world and all the degenerate stuff. You know what, you need to be doing campfires, farming, homesteading, like climbing mountains, like all that stuff. You gotta be doing all that stuff. Again, a lot of truth in what he's saying, but he's caught up in this dialectic. He's just going to do the opposite.
Nor can we accept a world in which our connection to our ancestral lands is severed, since we must connect to the spirits of the land and our ancestors through such places in order to contact the divine. We revere the trees and stones they revered. Iamblichus explains, whether it is certain animals or plants or any of the other things on earth governed by superior beings, they simultaneously share in their respective care and procure for us an indivisible communion with the gods.
Now, let me clarify, because I do agree with him. Like, it is true, we need a connection with land. Cities are not places that we were meant to live. I was going to say, we're not naturally meant to live in cities, but the way I've been talking about the concept of nature, maybe I should be a bit more careful with my words here, but the modern city is a terrible place for the human. But actually there's a conception of the heavenly city too. The city has a heavenly archetype as well, so it's not even necessarily city living is fundamentally wrong either, but we have lost that very necessary rooting with land, with grass, with fresh air.
We do not reject technology as a principle, but we must reject any technology which obscures or obstructs our path to the divine, such as those which alienate us from the natural world.
But how can he say exactly that technology is not part of the natural world? How does he now set up technology against the natural world? Even if you're at home wearing a virtual reality helmet, you can still say that you're in the natural world. I mean, yeah, you're not feeling the wind, you're not hearing the birds, but you are interacting with electricity and light. How are we to say that those are not exactly part of the natural world? What about thoughts and sensations? Are we just trying to say that, the mental world versus the more empirical world, the world of Knox, audio? I mean, but again, those are all mental sensations too.
To quote the psychologist Carl Jung, in his man and his symbols. As scientific understanding has grown, so our world has become dehumanized. Man feels himself isolated in the cosmos because he is no longer involved in nature and has lost his emotional, unconscious identity with natural phenomena. No voices now speak to him from stones, plants, and animals, nor does he speak to them believing they can hear. His contact with nature has gone, and with it has gone the profound emotional energy that this symbolic connection supplied.
In the good old times, we used to speak to rocks and trees, and they spoke back to us. Is that something that's automatically good? Sure, you've got a connection there. You can sense a connection. There's definitely a spirit here. So it must be good, right? It must be good. I've got a connection, got a real experience, a participatory experience. I felt that it was right. What happened to all the theology he said he was going to explain? And Carl Jung was not a practicing pagan as far as I know. He recognized useful psychological mechanisms in paganism.
The practice of gene modification must, I think most will agree, be limited by ethical guidelines. And as pagans, we are only concerned with pagan ethics. Therefore, I posit that to improve on existing genetic material may be permissible, but to seek to improve on a divine work by adding new genes from one organism into another is hubris.
I don't think he has the foundation to make these claims. I agree because humans are made in the image of God. They don't have that view, and also it's basically relativistic in the pagan world. They want to do their own thing, and they're not universalist, like this Germanic paganism should involve the whole world. They don't believe that. But then how are you going to say that the transhumanists shouldn't be doing what they're doing? You don't think they have some gods on their side too? They worship some gods too. You got your gods, they got their gods.
And every race on earth is allotted a common guardian by this god, and every temple is also allotted a particular guardian. The same sentiment is present in the original work of Plato. In Laws, it states, "By paying honor and respect to one's kinfolk and all who share in the worship of the gods of the tribe, and who also share descent and blood, a person will also enjoy the favor of the gods of the household, who will be well disposed towards his own begetting of children." This is obviously in direct conflict with the idea that tribalism is an outdated disease of man, which needs to be overcome so that we can unite as a global humanity. You cannot believe such a thing without defying your pagan ancestors. And if you do that, you are not a pagan. None of the pagan religions are concerned with the modern concept of humanity. They are concerned with peoples and their gods.
So he's saying, you are not a pagan if you insist that all the world should be pagan like you are. It's just counterintuitive. I'm Orthodox. If I didn't believe that it would be good for all people to become Orthodox, then why would I even call myself Orthodox? Of course I'm going to believe that it's the true church. Anyone who takes their religion seriously would believe in their religion. They would believe in objectively true principles for all mankind.
So these core assertions of pagan belief are, I believe, vital in order for paganism to endure in a globalized technocratic regime. I will reiterate them simply. We revere nature as a path to the divine and therefore require access to natural sacred spaces. We revere death as a path to the divine and therefore reject any ideology that seeks to escape death. We revere our bodies as a gift from the gods, which were created according to divine will and are therefore neither incomplete nor imperfect, but must be maintained and kept healthy and strong. We believe that the diversity of mankind is a manifestation of divine will, not a problem to be overcome, and that to approach the divine, we must follow the example of our own ancestors, revering the sacred spaces of our own ancestral homelands in order to become closer to the gods of our ancestors. We must therefore live in accordance with our own ancestral laws and customs, and no others.
I don't know. There's something nice about continuing traditions with your ancestors, but if you know that your ancestors were worshipping demons, You don't want to continue that tradition.
By asserting the above beliefs, we can begin also to defend ourselves from religious persecution. We can collectively oppose initiatives, political rhetoric, and legislation that would undermine our right to religious freedom and our ability to practice our religion. We must work in collaboration with organizations like the registered charity, the Odinist Fellowship, which has for years campaigned, often successfully, for the rights and freedoms of pious pagans in this country, defending them from persecution in the workplace and in the media. They have demonstrated that coordinated political and legal action is effective in securing pagans the right to practice their ancestral faith. And I'd like to see more organizations like the Odinist Fellowship emerge, and that can only begin through networking. After my talk, please use this event as an opportunity to meet like-minded people. Exchange contact details so that in future you can work together in whatever ways you can to maintain communities and social networks of people who are committed to and ready to act whenever and wherever pagans are being prevented from practicing their faith.
The way you attract people is by having a functioning religion. You can do the networking stuff later on. You have to have a real connection with the divine, as you would say. So you need people to want to attend your ceremonies and make sacrifices and celebrate your festivals and otherwise live the pagan way of life. And no, I'm not telling people to do this. I'm just saying if I was in his shoes and I'm just trying to adopt his worldview for the sake of perhaps doing an internal critique. You want paganism, I guess it is growing, right? It is growing. So maybe you want more YouTube videos and more campfires and bonfires and more like camping trips. I don't know, but you want people to really participate in this, right? But no, what we see is an attempt to create religion on the fly, and these traditions themselves have been lost.
There is no humanity. There are only cultures and peoples, each with their own ideas about what life is for. If materialist neo-Gnostics and their ilk come to see nature, including our own bodies, as a faulty machine that they know how to tweak to improve productivity or human happiness, they risk damaging the natural world, our existence itself.
So he says that there are only cultures and peoples, each with their own ideas of what life is for. And so let's say one of those peoples comes to believe in transhumanism, and they come to believe that they should treat the entire world like a machine. So how is he then supposed to argue against that? They just have different gods from you. This weakness is called relativism. Anyways, I'm going to wrap it up here. I just think that they're caught up in the world necessarily because they view the world as divine, and that totally collapses categories. It's not easy when you basically believe in pantheism. And we do see some Christian themes. We see a lot of good qualities, but it's meandering. It doesn't have the foundation to make objective claims about what is good and evil. So we would hope that they would move in the direction of orthodoxy. You can have a connection with your people and with the ancient world. You can have ceremony and ritual. You can have matter, and you can have the world of the gods transformed into the world of the saints and the angels. So some of you may be on your way, and I wish all of you a good journey. Hasta luego, amigos!